the legend of Medusa, the woman behind the curse. Settle into your pillows now and let your breathing slow. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of ancient time to a story that has been told for thousands of years, a story of beauty, betrayal, and transformation. Close your eyes and let us begin. In the beginning, before temples rose from marble quarries, before heroes walked the earth with bronze swords gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, there was only darkness and the swirling chaos of creation. From this primordial void emerged the first beings, ancient, powerful, and strange. Among them were the protogen, the firstborn gods who shaped the very fabric of reality. And from their unions came the Titans, towering figures who ruled the cosmos before the Olympians ever dreamed of their golden thrones. But our story does not begin with Zeus or his thunderbolts, nor with Poseidon's tempestuous seas. Our story begins with a young woman named Medusa, whose name would echo through eternity, though few would remember her as she truly was. Medusa was born into a world already ancient beyond imagining. She was one of three sisters, collectively known as the Gorgons, daughters of Phorcys and Ceta, deities of the deep sea's hidden terrors and mysteries. Her sisters were Athena, whose name meant the mighty, and Uriel, the far-roaming one. But while her sisters were born immortal, cursed from their first breath with monstrous forms that would never know death's release, Medusa entered the world as something different, something unprecedented. She was mortal, and she was beautiful. Imagine, if you will, the shores of ancient Greece, where the wine-dark sea meets golden sand. Picture a young woman walking barefoot along the beach at dawn, her hair catching the first light of morning. According to the oldest tellings, those whispered by grandmothers to sleepy children, those preserved in fragments of lost epics, Medusa's hair was her crowning glory. Some said it shone like polished bronze, others that it rippled like dark water under moonlight, cascading down her back in waves that seemed almost alive with their luster and movement. Her eyes, those who saw her said, held the depth of the ocean itself, gray-green like the Aegean on a stormy day, flecked with amber and gold. When she laughed, it was like the sound of waves gently caressing the shore. When she moved, she possessed a grace that seemed to flow from some divine source, as though the muses themselves had choreographed her every gesture. But Medusa was not vain about her beauty. In the earliest versions of her tale, she was a priestess, a devoted servant of Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, warfare, and crafts. To serve in Athena's temple was considered one of the highest honors a mortal woman could achieve. The priestesses of Athena took vows of chastity, dedicating their lives to the goddess, tending her sacred flame, and maintaining the sanctity of her shrines. The temple where Medusa served stood in Athens, though some accounts place it in other locations across the Greek world. These temples were not like the ruins we see today, sun-bleached stones open to the sky. No, in their glory, they were vibrant places of color and life. The columns were painted in rich reds and blues. Gold leaf caught the sunlight. Inside the inner sanctum, the cult statue of Athena towered above, her ivory skin and golden armor gleaming in the lamplight, her eyes, inlaid with precious stones, seeming to watch over her devoted servants with an expression both stern and protective. Medusa performed her duties with unwavering devotion. Each morning, she would wake before dawn to prepare the temple for the day's rituals. She would sweep the marble floors until they gleamed like still water. She would arrange the offerings brought by worshippers, olive branches, woven cloth, small clay figures, and libations of wine and honey. She would tend the eternal flame that burned in Athena's honor, ensuring it never dimmed or died. The work was demanding, but Medusa found peace in it. There was a rhythm to the days, a sacred order that felt right and true. She would watch as supplicants came to seek Athena's wisdom, young women praying for skill in weaving, soldiers seeking courage before battle, judges requesting clarity in difficult decisions. And Medusa would help them, guiding them in the proper prayers, showing them how to make their offerings acceptable to the goddess. At night, when the temple fell quiet and the other priestesses had retired to their chambers, Medusa would sometimes stand in the courtyard and look up at the stars. The constellations wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and she felt herself to be a small but meaningful part of the great cosmic order. She was content in her service, fulfilled in her devotion, at peace with her vow of chastity and her dedication to Athena. But the gods of Olympus, for all their power and immortality, were not always wise, and they were rarely just. Poseidon, the earth shaker, lord of the seas, god of horses and earthquakes, was known for his tempestuous moods. His passions ran as deep and wild as the oceans he commanded. When calm, he could be generous, blessing sailors with fair winds, granting fishermen bountiful catches, causing fresh water to spring from barren rock. But when angered, he was terrifying beyond measure. He could summon storms that swallowed entire fleets, earthquakes that toppled cities, and tsunamis that erased coastal villages from existence. Poseidon was also known for his wandering eye and his inability to accept rejection. He had pursued countless nymphs and mortal women, and what he desired, he typically took, with little regard for consent or consequence. One day, a day that would change everything, Poseidon visited Athens. Some versions of the story say he came in the guise of a mortal man. Others claim he appeared in his full divine glory, radiant and terrible. He entered Athena's temple, perhaps drawn by curiosity, perhaps by some darker purpose. And there, performing her sacred duties, he saw Medusa. The god of the sea was immediately captivated by her beauty. He watched as she moved through the temple with that fluid grace, as she bent to arrange offerings with careful reverence, as she murmured prayers to her goddess. The desire that kindled in Poseidon's heart was not gentle admiration or respectful attraction. It was the consuming, possessive want of a god accustomed to taking whatever caught his fancy. He approached her. Some accounts suggest he tried to woo her with honeyed words, promising her treasures from the ocean's depths, pearls that glowed with inner light, coral more precious than gold, a palace beneath the waves where she could live as a queen. But Medusa, devoted to her vows and to Athena, refused him. She explained that she was consecrated to the goddess, that she could not break her vows of chastity, that the temple was a sacred space that must remain pure. Poseidon was not accustomed to hearing the word no. What happened next is the moment that would define Medusa's existence for all eternity, though it is also the moment most obscured by time and conflicting tellings. The oldest versions, the ones that speak most clearly, say that Poseidon, in his rage and desire, violated Medusa within the very temple she served. He desecrated Athena's sacred space and destroyed the sanctity of her priestess's vows, not through Medusa's choice, but through divine force. The details are too violent to dwell upon, especially in this quiet hour meant for rest and peace. What matters is this: Medusa did nothing wrong. She was a victim of a god's cruelty, a casualty of Poseidon's inability to master his own impulses. In that terrible moment, everything she had built, her service, her peace, her devotion, her very identity, was shattered. And then in the aftermath, something even more unjust occurred. Athena discovered what had happened in her temple. One might hope that the goddess of wisdom would have recognized the truth, that her priestess had been violated against her will, that the sanctity of the temple had been broken by Poseidon's violence, not by Medusa's choice. One might hope that Athena would have shown compassion to a devoted servant who had suffered terribly. But Athena's response was not compassion, it was rage. Perhaps the goddess was truly angry at Poseidon, but unable or unwilling to punish a fellow Olympian, especially one as powerful as the Earth Shaker. Perhaps she saw her temple's defilement as a personal affront that demanded retribution, and the only available target was Medusa. Perhaps, in the complex politics of Olympus, where gods and goddesses competed for honor and supremacy, Athena could not directly challenge her uncle without risking open warfare. Or perhaps, and this is the interpretation that makes Athena's actions most comprehensible, if not more just, the goddess believed she was offering protection, not punishment. Some scholars of the ancient myths suggest that Athena's transformation of Medusa was meant to ensure that the priestess would never be vulnerable to such violence again. By making her monstrous, by giving her the power to turn anyone who looked upon her to stone, Athena ensured that no man, mortal or divine, would ever be able to harm Medusa again. But if this was Athena's intention, it was a protection indistinguishable from a curse, and it came without Medusa's consent, another violation layered upon the first. The transformation happened suddenly, without warning, without explanation. Medusa felt it beginning in her scalp, a terrible burning sensation as though her hair had caught fire. But there was no flame. Instead, she felt movement where there should be none, a writhing, a shifting. She reached up with trembling hands and felt not the silken locks she had known all her life, but something else entirely, something that twisted and coiled around her fingers. Serpents. Her beautiful hair, her crowning glory, had become a nest of living snakes. They hissed and struck at the air, their scales gleaming bronze and green and gold, their eyes like tiny chips of amber. They were not separate creatures, but extensions of herself. She could feel through them, sense through them, and they responded to her emotions, becoming more agitated when she felt fear or anger, subsiding into uneasy calm when she tried to quiet her racing heart. But the serpents were only the beginning of the transformation. Her skin, which had been soft and sun-warmed, took on a different quality. It became harder, more resilient, with a faint greenish tinge in certain light, like tarnished bronze. Her nails grew sharp and dark, almost like talons. Her teeth became fangs, her tongue slightly forked. Some accounts describe her developing wings, great leathery appendages that sprouted from her shoulder blades, capable of carrying her through the air with powerful beats. But the most terrible change, the one that would define her existence from that moment forward, was what happened to her eyes. Those beautiful gray-green eyes, which had once reflected the sea at its most peaceful, now held a deadly power. Anyone who looked directly into Medusa's eyes would be instantly transformed into stone, not killed, not in the usual sense, but frozen in that moment forever, their flesh and blood and bone transmuted into cold, lifeless granite or marble. The transformation was instantaneous and irreversible. No prayer, no magic, no divine intervention could undo it. Imagine the horror of that discovery. Imagine Medusa, confused and in pain from her transformation, seeking out a mirror or a still pool of water to understand what had happened to her. Imagine her looking around desperately for help, for comfort, for explanation. And imagine the first person she encountered, perhaps a fellow priestess, perhaps a temple attendant, meeting her gaze in that unguarded moment. The person's scream would have been cut short as the transformation took hold. In the space of a heartbeat, living flesh became cold stone. The person's expression would be frozen forever, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in mid-shriek, hands raised in futile defense. And Medusa would have been forced to watch, to understand what she had become, what she could do, what she had lost. She could never again look directly at another living being. She could never meet someone's eyes in conversation, never share a moment of connection, never see her own reflection without risking turning herself to stone. She was utterly, profoundly isolated by this curse, this protection that Athena had inflicted upon her. The temple was evacuated. Word spread quickly through Athens of the monster that now dwelt in Athena's sacred space. Soldiers were dispatched, but they could not approach Medusa without meeting her gaze and suffering the stone-cold transformation. The few who tried found themselves joining a growing garden of statues around the temple, warriors frozen mid-charge, their bronze weapons still raised, their faces locked in expressions of determination that would never fade. Medusa fled. She had no choice. The temple that had been her sanctuary, her home, her place of purpose and peace, was now impossible for her to remain in. She was a danger to everyone around her, and everyone feared her. The devoted priestess had become the monster through no fault of her own. She traveled by night when fewer people were abroad, when she could hide her transformed visage beneath a hooded cloak. She kept to the wilderness, away from cities and villages, away from the shepherds tending their flocks and the farmers working their fields. Some accounts say she wept constantly during these early days of her exile, her tears falling like rain. Though whether the serpents on her head ever stopped hissing long enough for her to find any peace is a question left unanswered by the ancient sources. Eventually, Medusa found her way to a desolate place, a remote island, or a barren wilderness at the edge of the world, far from the places where mortals dwelt. The location varies in different tellings. Some say it was in Libya, in the burning deserts where the sun scorched the earth and few dared to travel. Others place it on a rocky island in the far reaches of the Mediterranean, where seabirds wheeled overhead and the waves crashed endlessly against jagged cliffs. It was here that Medusa reunited with her sisters, Athena and Uriel. These two, immortal and monstrous since birth, had always lived at the margins of the world, feared and shunned by mortals and gods alike. But they welcomed their transformed sister, recognizing in her something of their own exile and otherness. The three Gorgons made their home together in a cave or a ruined temple. The accounts differ, and for a time there was a strange sort of peace. Athena, the mighty one, was fierce and protective. She hunted to provide food and watched over the approaches to their dwelling, ready to defend her sisters from any who might threaten them. Uriel, the far-roaming one, would fly across the wilderness on her great wings, exploring the boundaries of their domain, finding sources of fresh water, locating the rare travelers who ventured into their territory so they could be avoided, or, if they proved hostile, dealt with. And Medusa withdrew into herself. The vibrant young woman who had once found joy in service and purpose in devotion was gone, replaced by something bitter and broken. She no longer prayed to Athena. How could she, after what the goddess had done? She no longer thought of the life she'd lost with anything but anguish. The curse had taken everything from her: her beauty, her humanity, her future, her hope. The serpents on her head hissed their eternal chorus, a constant reminder of what she had become. They never slept, never quieted completely, never allowed her a moment of the peace she craved. She learned to communicate with them after a fashion, to sense through them, to use them as extensions of her will. But they were not companions. They were the mark of her curse, the living symbol of her transformation from priestess to monster. Time passed strangely in that isolated place. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Medusa had been mortal, and unlike her immortal sisters, she aged, though slowly, as if the curse that transformed her had altered even the flow of time in her body. Her face, which had once been so beautiful, became harder, more severe. The softness of youth gave way to the sharp edges of suffering and isolation. Her gaze, which had once been warm and welcoming, became cold and distant, even when she was careful not to look directly at her sisters. But she was not left in peace. Despite the remoteness of her exile, travelers occasionally stumbled upon the Gorgons' dwelling. Some came by accident, sailors blown off course by storms, merchants who had lost their way in the desert, adventurers seeking shortcuts through uncharted territories. These, Medusa usually tried to warn away, calling out from the safety of shadows to tell them to flee, to not look back, to forget they had ever come to this cursed place. But others came intentionally, seeking the Gorgons. These were heroes, men driven by pride, by the desire for glory, by the need to prove themselves against impossible odds. They had heard the legends of the Gorgon Medusa, the monster whose gaze could turn men to stone. And they came to kill her, to take her head as a trophy, to win fame by slaying something so dangerous and feared. These heroes never listened to warnings. They came armed with bronze swords and shields polished to a mirror shine, wearing armor that gleamed in the sun. They came with strategies, having consulted seers and wise men about how to defeat a creature they could not look upon. And they came with the confidence of men who believed themselves chosen by the gods, destined for greatness, certain that they would be the one to succeed where others had failed. They joined the growing collection of statues around the Gorgons' dwelling, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds over the years, warriors frozen in heroic poses, their weapons eternally raised, their faces locked in expressions of shock as they realized, in their final moment, that they had failed. The statues became a barrier, a warning, a garden of the fallen surrounding Medusa's refuge, like a macabre monument to hubris and the cost of seeking glory. With each hero who came, with each man she turned to stone, Medusa felt a little more of her humanity slip away. At first, she had felt grief and guilt, even for those who came seeking her death. They were victims too, in their way, victims of the culture that sent young men to face monsters, victims of the stories that made her into something to be destroyed rather than pitied, victims of their own pride and the gods' cruel games. But over time, the grief hardened into something else, into bitterness, into rage, into a cold acceptance of what she had become. If the world saw her as a monster, if heroes sought her out to kill her, if even the goddess she had served had abandoned her to this fate, then let them come. Let them try. Let them join the army of stone that testified to her power and her suffering. Medusa stopped trying to warn travelers away. She stopped feeling guilt when her gaze transformed living flesh to lifeless rock. She embraced the identity that had been forced upon her, became the monster that everyone already believed her to be. It was easier than holding onto the memory of who she had been, easier than living with the constant ache of loss and injustice. Her sisters watched this transformation with concern but said nothing. They had always been monsters. They had never known what it was to be human, to have that humanity stripped away. They could not fully understand what Medusa had lost, what she continued to lose with each passing year, each hardening of her heart. And then one day he came. Perseus, the hero who would finally succeed where all others had failed. The man whose name would be forever linked with hers, whose fame would be built on her destruction. But to understand why Perseus came seeking Medusa's head, we must step back and understand his story, for it is tangled up with the same divine cruelty and casual injustice that had shaped Medusa's fate. Perseus was the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and Danae, a mortal princess. His conception was itself an act of divine violation. Zeus had come to Danae in the form of golden rain, seeping through the bronze chamber where her father had imprisoned her to prevent the fulfillment of a prophecy that said his grandson would kill him. Danae had no choice in the matter, no way to refuse a god who came as liquid light. And so Perseus was born, another child of Zeus's countless conquests, another demigod whose existence testified to the casual cruelty of the Olympian gods. Perseus and his mother were cast out to sea in a wooden chest by Danae's father, who hoped to circumvent the prophecy by killing them both without technically committing murder himself. But they survived, washing ashore on an island where they were taken in by a kind fisherman. Perseus grew up strong and brave, devoted to his mother, skilled in hunting and warfare. Years later, when Perseus was a young man, he found himself in an impossible situation. The king of the island where they lived, Polydex, desired Danae and saw Perseus as an obstacle to his pursuit. During a banquet where nobles were expected to offer gifts to the king, Polydex schemed to rid himself of the troublesome young hero. He announced that he would accept horses as gifts from those who had them, knowing that Perseus, being poor, could offer none. Perseus, young and proud and perhaps foolish in the way of young heroes, boasted that if the king desired a greater gift, Perseus would bring him anything he asked for, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Polydex, seeing his opportunity, immediately accepted, making it a formal vow that Perseus could not break without dishonor. It was, of course, meant to be a death sentence. No one who had sought the Gorgons had ever returned. The statues surrounding their dwelling testified to the failure of every hero who had tried. Polydex expected Perseus to die in the attempt, leaving Danae vulnerable and unprotected, free for the king to pursue without interference. But Perseus, unlike the heroes who had come before, had advantages they lacked. He was the son of Zeus, and Athena and Hermes took interest in his quest. Perhaps Athena saw a chance to finally rid herself of the reminder of her temple's defilement. Perhaps Hermes was simply bored and found the prospect of helping a demigod amusing. Regardless of their motivations, they provided Perseus with the tools he would need. From Athena, he received a polished bronze shield, reflective as a perfect mirror, through which he could view Medusa's reflection without meeting her deadly gaze. From Hermes, he received a sickle or sword of adamantine, sharp enough to cut through the Gorgon's bronze-tough skin and bone. The gods also directed him to the Grae, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth among them, who could tell him the location of the Hesperides, nymphs who guarded certain magical items. Perseus's quest to find these items is a tale of its own, full of adventures and challenges. He had to trick the Grae by stealing their shared eye and refusing to return it until they revealed what he needed to know. He had to journey to the garden of the Hesperides at the edge of the world. There, he obtained winged sandals that would allow him to fly, akibases, a special pouch that would safely hold Medusa's head once he'd taken it, and the helm of Hades, which would make him invisible. Armed with these divine gifts, Perseus set out to find the Gorgon's dwelling. He flew over sea and desert, guided by the gods' direction, until he came at last to that desolate place where Medusa and her sisters had made their home. He descended under cover of darkness, the helm of Hades concealing him from view, and surveyed the scene. The statues stood everywhere, dozens upon dozens of warriors turned to stone, forming a maze of frozen figures around the entrance to the Gorgon's cave. Their expressions of terror and shock were visible even in the dim light. Some had clearly been running away when the transformation took them. Others were frozen mid-attack, their weapons still raised. It was a garden of the dead, a testament to Medusa's power and the folly of heroes. Perseus waited and watched. The sources disagree on many details of what happened next, whether he came during the day or night, whether Medusa was asleep or awake, whether her sisters were present or absent. But the core of the tale remains consistent across tellings. Perseus approached Medusa using Athena's shield as a mirror, looking only at her reflection to avoid her deadly gaze. In some versions, he found her sleeping, exhausted after years of constant vigilance, her serpent hair finally quiet in slumber. In others, she was awake but distracted, perhaps mourning her fate, perhaps simply existing in the numb state that had become her life. He came from behind or from the side, moving with the silence of a trained warrior. Medusa never saw him, or if she did, she saw him too late. He positioned himself carefully, watching her reflection in the polished shield, and with one powerful stroke of the adamantine blade, he severed her head from her body. The moment of Medusa's death was violent and strange and shot through with dark magic. From her severed neck sprang two creatures, Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant born wielding a golden sword. These were her children, conceived during Poseidon's violation of her in Athena's temple, carried in her transformed body all these years, and released only in the moment of her death. Even in dying, Medusa gave life, though she would never know her offspring, never see Pegasus fly through the clouds or Chrysaor grow to adulthood. Perseus quickly placed Medusa's head in the kibices, the magical pouch. Even severed from her body, the head retained its power. Her eyes could still turn living creatures to stone. The serpent still writhed and hissed. It was a weapon of tremendous power, and Perseus understood immediately how valuable it would be. Athena and Uriel, hearing the commotion or perhaps sensing through some supernatural bond that their sister had been killed, rushed to the scene. They shrieked with rage and grief, their voices carrying across the wilderness like the cries of terrible birds. But Perseus had already donned the helm of Hades, making himself invisible, and activated the winged sandals. He flew away before the immortal Gorgons could exact their vengeance, carrying Medusa's head as his trophy. The two surviving Gorgons could only wail and rage at the sky, unable to pursue what they could not see, unable to bring back their sister, unable to do anything but mourn. They had been three, and now they were two. Medusa, the mortal one, the beautiful one, the one who had been human before being cursed, was gone. Her body lay in the dust, and with it died the last remnants of the priestess she had once been. But Medusa's story did not end with her death. In some ways, it had only begun, for Perseus carried her head with him, and it became the tool through which he accomplished all his subsequent heroic deeds. He used it to rescue Andromeda, a princess chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. When the creature rose from the depths, all tentacles and teeth and rage, Perseus simply revealed Medusa's face, and the monster turned to stone and sank back beneath the waves. He married Andromeda, though some versions suggest he had to use the head again to defeat her previous suitor and his armed supporters. When Perseus finally returned home and found that Polydex had been harassing his mother during his absence, he used the head again. He crashed the king's banquet, and when Polydex mocked him and demanded proof of his success, Perseus revealed Medusa's face. The king and all his supporters were instantly transformed into stone, frozen forever in their feasting hall. Even after death, even reduced to a severed head in a bag, Medusa was still being used, still an instrument in the hands of men and gods, still powerful, still dangerous, still denied agency and choice. The pattern that had defined her life continued in death. Eventually, Perseus gave the head to Athena, who mounted it on her aegis, her shield or breastplate. There it remained, a permanent fixture on the goddess's armor, a perpetual reminder of Athena's power and perhaps of her vengeance. The image of Medusa's face, with its serpent hair and terrible gaze, became one of Athena's most recognizable symbols. It appeared on temples, on shields, on coins, on pottery. Medusa's face, reproduced thousands of times, became a ward against evil, a protective symbol, an apotropaic device meant to frighten away harm. There is a bitter irony in this. Medusa, who had been Athena's devoted priestess, who had served the goddess faithfully until Poseidon's violence destroyed her life, became in death Athena's permanent shield-bearer. The goddess who had cursed her, who had transformed her into a monster rather than protecting her, now wore her face as armor. Every image of Athena in her full martial aspect included Medusa's severed head, the serpents forever frozen in mid-hiss, the eyes forever holding their deadly power. But over the centuries and millennia that followed, something interesting happened to Medusa's image. It evolved and transformed, just as she herself had been transformed in life. In the earliest artistic representations, Medusa was depicted as truly monstrous, a grotesque face with a gaping mouth, protruding tongue, wild eyes, and serpents writhing from her head. These images, called gorgonaea, were meant to be frightening, to ward off evil through their sheer ugliness and power. But as Greek art became more sophisticated, as sculptors and painters developed greater skill, the depictions of Medusa began to change. Artists started to remember, or perhaps to imagine, the beauty that Medusa had possessed before her transformation. They began to sculpt her with a face that was beautiful even in its monstrousness. The serpents still present, the power still evident, but the features lovely, even haunting. There was something tragic in these later representations, something that suggested the woman beneath the curse, the victim beneath the monster. One of the most famous such depictions is the Medusa Rondinini, a marble sculpture from the classical period, which shows her face as serene, almost peaceful, with the serpents arranged almost decoratively around her face rather than as instruments of horror. It's as if the artist understood that Medusa's story was not one of inherent evil, but of tragedy, that the monster had once been a woman, and perhaps in some way still was. This evolution continued through the Roman period and into the Renaissance and beyond. Artists like Caravaggio and Rubens painted Medusa with her face showing not just horror but anguish, surprise, betrayal, human emotions that reminded viewers that she had been human once. The serpents became less prominent, or were stylized into something almost beautiful. The deadly gaze was shown not as malevolent but as powerful in a way that commanded respect, even sympathy. In some representations, Medusa's face was shown at the moment of her beheading, her expression caught between life and death, horror and release, suffering and peace. These images are disturbing not because they are monstrous, but because they are so human, because they force the viewer to confront the violence of her death, and by extension, the injustice of her transformation. Modern interpretations of Medusa's myth have brought yet another transformation to her image. Feminist scholars and artists have reclaimed her story, seeing in it a powerful metaphor for victimization, transformation, and the ways that society responds to survivors of assault. They point out what has been said here, that Medusa was a victim, not a villain, that she was punished for being violated, that she was transformed into a monster by those who should have protected her, that she was hunted and killed for the crime of having been cursed. In this reading, Medusa becomes a symbol of female rage, righteous, justified, and powerful. Her ability to turn men to stone becomes not a curse but a defense, a way of ensuring that she could never be victimized again. Her serpent hair represents not monstrousness but the wild, untamable aspects of femininity that patriarchal society fears and seeks to control. Her story becomes not a tale of heroism, Perseus the brave slaying the monster, but a tragedy of injustice compounded by violence. The image of Medusa has been reclaimed as a symbol of protection for survivors of assault, particularly sexual assault. Just as her face was used in ancient times to ward off evil, modern survivors sometimes choose her image as a symbol of their own power, their own refusal to be victimized again, their own transformation of trauma into strength. There are tattoos of her face, artwork depicting her as powerful rather than monstrous, poems and stories that retell her myth from her perspective rather than Perseus's. Some versions imagine what might have happened if Medusa had survived, if she had escaped Perseus, or if her sisters had saved her. These stories often show her finding peace, learning to control her powers, perhaps even finding a way to reverse the curse or to help other victims. They give her the agency that was denied her in the original myth, the happy ending that she never received. Other interpretations lean into the darkness of her story, exploring the psychological reality of what it might have been like to live as Medusa lived, isolated, feared, transformed into the very thing that traumatized her. These stories don't offer easy resolutions or happy endings, but they do offer validation, the acknowledgement that trauma changes people, that victims are not required to be perfect or pure or even particularly likable, that rage and bitterness are understandable responses to injustice. There are also those who point to the deeper mythological implications of Medusa's story. Some scholars suggest that Medusa and her sisters represent an older, pre-Olympian tradition, chthonic deities associated with the earth and the underworld, powerful female figures who were demonized by the patriarchal sky gods of the invading Greek culture. In this reading, Medusa's story is not just personal tragedy but cultural erasure, the replacement of goddess with monster, the transformation of sacred power into something to be feared and destroyed. The triple nature of the Gorgons, three sisters with Medusa as the mortal one, echoes other triple goddess formations in mythology: the maiden, mother, and crone, the three fates, the three graces. There's something archetypal about this structure, something that suggests Medusa's story taps into very ancient patterns of belief and storytelling. Perhaps Medusa's mortality was itself part of the curse, the gods' way of ensuring that this particular manifestation of female power could be eliminated, could be controlled, could be turned into a cautionary tale rather than remaining a figure of worship or respect. But perhaps we have wandered too far into interpretation and analysis. Let us return to the story itself, to the emotional truth of Medusa's experience, regardless of what symbolic meanings we might layer upon it. Imagine, one last time, what it was like to be Medusa, to wake up each morning, if she slept at all, to the sound of serpents hissing around her face, to feel their scales against her cheeks, to sense through them the world around her, to be unable to ever forget, even for a moment, what she had become, to remember the life she had lost, the peaceful mornings in Athena's temple, the satisfaction of serving her goddess, the simple human pleasures of looking at the sunrise or meeting someone's eyes in conversation, or seeing her own reflection and recognizing herself. To live with the knowledge that she could never again safely look at another living being, that any moment of inattention, any accidental meeting of eyes, would result in death, to be surrounded by the statues of those she had killed, some of whom had been seeking her death, but some of whom had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. To know that the world saw her as a monster, as something to be feared and destroyed, rather than as a victim of divine cruelty. To live in exile, in isolation, with only her immortal sisters for company, sisters who loved her but who could not truly understand what she had lost because they had never been human. To feel herself changing over the years, her heart hardening, her humanity slipping away, becoming more and more the monster that everyone believed her to be because it was easier than holding onto the memory of the woman she had been. And then finally to die, to feel the blade slide through her neck, to have one brief moment of sensation, pain, shock, perhaps relief that it was finally over, before darkness took her. To not even have the dignity of being buried, of being mourned, of having her body treated with respect. Instead, to have her head severed and carried away in a bag, to be used as a weapon, to continue serving the purposes of others even in death. This is Medusa's story, not a tale of heroism but of injustice, not a monster's rampage but a victim's tragedy. And yet, for all its darkness, there is something powerful in it too. Medusa endured. She survived her transformation, lived with her curse, became something that the gods themselves feared. She was hunted by heroes but killed dozens of them before she finally fell. Even in death, her power remained, her image endured, her name echoed through the millennia. She was denied justice in life, denied compassion from the goddess she had served, denied any chance to simply be human again. But she was not denied everything. She had her rage, her power, her ability to ensure that no one would ever harm her again without paying the ultimate price. And she has her immortality, not in the literal sense like her sisters, but in memory, in story, in the countless retellings and reinterpretations of her myth. Every time someone sees her image on a shield or a building, every time someone tells her story, every time an artist chooses to depict not just her monstrousness but her tragedy, Medusa lives again. Every survivor who sees their own story reflected in hers, every person who recognizes the injustice in her tale, every voice that says she was the victim, not the villain. These keep her alive in a way that transcends the physical death Perseus dealt her. And so we come to the end of our story, though in truth, Medusa's story has no end. It continues to be told, to be reimagined, to be claimed and reclaimed by each new generation. The woman who was once a priestess, who became a monster, who died as a trophy, has become a symbol of victimization and vengeance, of transformation and power, of the ways that society treats those who have been harmed. The serpents are still hissing in our cultural imagination. The deadly gaze still has power to turn things to stone, not literally now, but metaphorically. We still use her image as a ward, still tell her story as a warning, still argue about what her myth means and what lessons we should take from it. Perhaps that is the final irony of Medusa's tale. She sought peace and found chaos. She served devotedly and was punished. She was transformed into a monster and then killed for being monstrous. But in the end, she achieved a kind of immortality that even the gods might envy, not because she was powerful or beautiful or heroic, but because her story touches something essential about the human experience. About injustice and suffering, about transformation and survival, about the ways that trauma changes us, and the question of whether we can ever truly recover. Close your eyes now. Let the story settle into your mind like sediment drifting down through still water. Remember Medusa not as a monster but as a woman who loved her goddess, who performed her duties faithfully, who did nothing to deserve her fate. Remember that before the curse, before the serpents, before the deadly gaze, there was simply a young woman walking along a beach at dawn, her hair catching the light, her heart at peace. Remember her, and perhaps in remembering, grant her what the gods never did: compassion, understanding, and justice, even if it comes thousands of years too late. Sleep now, the story is finished. The serpents are finally quiet, and somewhere in the realm of myth and memory where such things matter, perhaps Medusa has found peace at last. Rest well.